I'm Helen Campbell, DG Interpretation of the European Commission. I'm going to talk about some of the aspects of the oil spill in the Gulf of Mexico, and in particular, I will focus on the wildlife that has been so badly affected there. Now, we know the whole story, the oil rig that exploded, pouring oil into the sea, and of course, there are currents and there is wind, and that oil has been floating around and has finally washed up, quite a lot of it, on the coast in Louisiana. As a result of which we've seen these really sad pictures of the poor birds covered in oil, and especially the brown pelican, which is also, by the way, the symbol, the emblem of Louisiana. Fortunately for these poor birds, and there are many, many of them, there is a team of excellent people, experts, who are posted there in a big rescue operation. They're working to try and catch the birds, and if they can catch them in time, they then go through a fairly complicated cleaning up operation, which means that the birds are first of all washed in warm vegetable oil to get rid of the sticky black oil. Then they have to be washed again in washing up liquid, basically mixed with water. Now, this all sounds fairly simple and straightforward as I'm putting it, but you try catching a poor pelican covered in oil and going through that operation. The trouble is the poor birds are so scared that they're so stressed they can almost die of fear. And so the whole actual operation cannot take longer than 45 minutes. That's 45 minutes per bird, and we're talking about 30 birds a day that are being treated like this. Quite an operation. It has happened before, alas. There have been other oil spills. And in fact, the man who is leading the team here also led a previous disaster team when the Exxon Valdez also leaked a vast amount of oil into the sea. Now, things are rather different. That was an oil tanker. A lot of oil was pumped and thrown into the sea. But things are a little different, because that was a one-off disaster. The oil was there, and that was that. It stopped. Eventually, a big cleaning up operation was possible, but this time we're talking about something rather unknown. We don't know when, finally, the leak will be finally capped. Will there be any long-term effects? Of course there will. And it isn't just the wildlife. It's the whole beach, the livelihood of fishermen. It's everything. Tourism will be affected as well. So if we start pointing fingers and pushing blame onto people, we shouldn't just be talking about money and just the cost of the operation. We should be thinking of those poor birds, because as long as that oil is being pumped into the sea, they are going to be the ones to suffer most. So have a thought, spare a thought, for the poor brown pelican, the emblem of Louisiana. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Neil Munro, and I'd like to talk to you this morning about the possible use of mobile phones on aircraft and what I think about that as a possible way forward. So I'll start now. Ladies and gentlemen, I guess that most of us accept our mobile phones and our use of email as a way of life that we couldn't manage without. But I think it's fair to say that people are probably divided into two groups. Those who value these modern technologies because they're indispensable, and those who enthuse about them because they find them very exciting. And let me tell you immediately that I firmly belong in the first group. So you can probably imagine my reaction when I read an article recently according to which airline companies are thinking of allowing people to use their mobile phones on planes. Immediately, I had this image of some idiot sitting in the row behind me, bellowing into his phone, "Darling, I'm on the plane." Now, for a long time, it's not been possible to use mobile phones on planes for safety reasons. And apparently it will still not be possible for landing and takeoff. but there are no safety objections to using phones on flights. And many airline companies who are looking for ever new ways of making money have thought that this could be an excellent business for them. And consequently, a number of pilot projects have been run already. And an interesting survey was conducted a few weeks ago with one group of passengers who had been on a flight where mobile phones were prohibited, as usual, and another group of passengers on a similar flight where mobile phones had been allowed. And the results of the survey were interesting and, in my opinion, rather surprising. For those passengers where planes or where mobile phones were not allowed, there was an overwhelming majority of passengers against, for the reasons I've indicated. But on those planes where people were able to use mobile phones, most people actually said it hadn't caused much inconvenience at all, because people used their phones very moderately, mostly for sending text messages, and certainly not for engaging in loud, long conversations. So I suspect it's just a matter of time before people will be able to use their mobile phones on all planes. But I have to say, I remain to be convinced that this is a good thing to do. Thank you very much.
Hello, I'll be talking briefly now, just for a few minutes, about sports drinks or energy drinks. That's the drinks that sportsmen and women are drinking all the time these days, it seems, whenever they are playing their sport. Drinks which are also being consumed a lot by the public at large. So, if you're ready, I'm going to start now. Ladies and gentlemen, you probably wouldn't think it just to look at me, but when I was a bit younger, I actually was a very keen sportsman. I played a lot of sport. I played a lot of football. I played quite a bit of tennis. And I also cycled a lot. I even entered some cycling competitions. Nowadays, though, I have become more of an armchair sportsman. I wouldn't go so far as to say I've become a couch potato, but still, I do spend more time these days watching sport on television rather than actually participating myself actively in games. And as I've been watching sport on TV over recent years, one thing has struck me, and that is that an increasing number of sportsmen and women, while they are involved in whatever game it may be, let's say a football match, they seem to be drinking all the time. And they're not just drinking water because they're thirsty. No, they are consuming these so-called sports drinks or energy drinks, drinks designed to replenish the energy that they have lost, that they have expended during their physical effort. Now, the interesting thing is that these drinks have also become popular among the public at large. Everybody, it seems nowadays, wants to consume these energy drinks, and the companies who are manufacturing them, of course, are making a fortune. What seems to be happening is this. People are sitting at home, like me, in their armchair, watching their sports stars on TV. These fit and healthy, sleek and slim, athletic individuals. And they see them drinking these drinks, and they think, at least this is what I suspect is going on, they think, well, maybe if I started drinking those drinks, I could become fit and healthy and athletic, just like my favorite sports star. So they go out and buy these drinks. But of course, the problem is that if you drink a lot of these energy drinks without actually practicing sport yourself, well, the result is quite the opposite from that you might intend. Because these drinks are ram-jam full of sugar, and they are highly calorific. So if you drink a lot of them without practicing sport, what is the result? The result is that you're going to get fatter, maybe even become obese, and certainly very unhealthy. And indeed, I would even suggest that these energy drinks are one of the contributing factors to the growing wave of obesity in many of our countries today. Thank you.
I'd like to talk to you today about why men hate shopping. If there's one thing that clearly shows that men and women are different, it's shopping. Women like to window shop and browse. Men shop with a mission. Men know exactly what they want to buy before they leave the house. Women, however, tend to decide on their purchases only after they've seen what's available in stores. Men easily get lost in shopping malls. Women spend so much time there, they can give shortcuts to the security staff. Women don't get stressed if a short shopping trip turns into a very long shopping trip. Men, on the other hand, insist on being in and out of a store in 20 minutes. But that may be for the good of their health. A medical study has shown that men who are forced to go on long shopping trips suffer from sudden increases in their blood pressure. This gives an entirely new meaning to the expression, shop till you drop. Yes, everything I've said is a broad generalization. There are some women out there who hate shopping, just like there are a very few men out there who love to buy shoes. However, these generalizations are firmly grounded in truth. They are backed up by a large number of studies, which have made the following findings. The average woman will spend about 3 years of her life shopping. Not surprisingly, women are responsible for more than 80% of consumer spending in the United States, in Europe, and in Australia. Women even make the majority of purchases in unexpected areas, such as buying a new car. Although that does depend on the type of car. Most sensible family vehicles are purchased by women. Most sports cars, however, are bought by men. But here's some consoling news for men. A recent study has shown that men are much less likely than women to return from a shopping trip empty-handed. And they might even return from that shopping trip with a brand new sports car. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to be talking to you about Father Christmas and the question of whether he exists. Now, of course, all children would answer yes to that question. They all believe in Father Christmas. However, many adults would probably say, no, he's definitely not there. The main reason they give is that it's not possible for one person to deliver presents to all the children in just one night. Now, there's a Polish professor who, despite being an adult, does still believe in Father Christmas. And he has set out to prove it to us. The main argument he gives for the existence of Father Christmas is that you see imitation Father Christmases everywhere. And all these imitation Father Christmases dress in the same way and look the same. They have the same long white beard. And he says, first of all, that you can only imitate something that actually exists. If something does not exist, then you have nothing to imitate. Secondly, our professor argues that it's a fact that all Father Christmases look the same. And that means that there was obviously one original version that they all want to look like. Furthermore, according to our Polish professor, Father Christmas does deliver presents to all the children in just one night. First of all, he argues that Father Christmas only delivers presents to good children. That means that he has a more limited number to go and visit. Secondly, it's a well-known fact that all good children find presents from Father Christmas waiting for them on the right day. Therefore, according to our professor, the only possible conclusion is that Father Christmas does exist on the basis of the facts. And he goes on to say that rumours to the contrary, that is to say that Father Christmas does not exist, have probably been spread by nasty people who were bad children and therefore hadn't been visited by Father Christmas. Thank you.
My name is Helen Campbell, DG Interpretation, European Commission. I'm going to talk about some of the aspects of the recent oil spill in the Gulf of Mexico. This happened in April 2010, and it has resulted in enormous amounts, 20,000 perhaps barrels of oil, being thrown into the Gulf of Mexico and floating one way and the other. And it has caused, as everybody knows, endless discussions, endless arguments, and a great deal of finger-pointing. Who's responsible? Who should pay the bill? How much is it going to cost in a huge clean-up operation? And who are the victims? And of course, wildlife is really the main victim, because the wildlife in Louisiana has been desperately affected by the oil washing up onto the shores, and of course, the poor birds are the first ones to suffer. Anybody who has read the newspapers recently will have seen pictures of these poor birds covered with sticky, black, gooey oil, and one of them, the brown pelican, is not only a bird of some distinction and fairly rare, but it is also the very emblem of Louisiana. And so the bird has become symbolic of all the horror, the damage that has been done in this catastrophe. Now, the whole coast is very much affected. As I said, the birds especially so. There is a team, a rescue team, working round the clock to try to find the birds, to capture them, to clean them, and to put them back into free life, but of course not in the same place. The coast, as I said, is suffering terribly. Not only the birds, but also the fishing industry is, of course, terribly affected as well. Beaches are threatened, and of course everybody turns to BP and says, look at the mess you've caused. This is all your fault, especially the CEO, Tony Hayward. Now, thinking back to what has happened, this is now 3 months after the event, and there is still no durable, no viable solution. The birds are still stuck in the oil. They're still being, of course, treated, captured, taken and washed and cleaned and let back into their environment, but many will die as a result of this. In fact, it's the second time that this poor brown pelican, the symbol of Louisiana, has been threatened. Because in the 1950s and 60s, the pesticides used in Louisiana also virtually wiped out the whole species. But the people of the area were so keen to have their emblem back that birds were brought from Florida so that the population could then be set up again, and finally they began to thrive again. In fact, it was only last year that the brown pelican was taken off the list of endangered species, and now the poor creatures are yet again being threatened. We don't know how long this is going to take, whether a solution will be found, and in the meantime, I think that the main victims are clearly the pelicans and the wildlife of that area. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Helen Campbell, formerly of the DG Interpretation of the European Commission. Today I'm going to talk to you about giving gifts, but in a particular context. Now, I'm speaking to you in December 2012, and we're very close to Christmas. Christmas is, of course, a time for giving presents. It's always very agreeable to give presents, but also to receive them. And I often find myself wondering what would be the best thing to buy for family members and friends. Let me now turn to another country, a little further afield, China. I visited China myself some years ago, where I noticed that it is customary to give gifts to everyone you meet. So if you go to China, remember to take along some presents. But giving gifts in China is also a little bit of a minefield. You have to get it right, be diplomatic, and choose the right gift. Let me give you some ideas, some tips here. Don't give anything too obviously expensive because it could be seen as a bribe. A good idea would be to take along maybe a book of beautiful photographs, perhaps from your own country or your own city, or perhaps another piece of local craft, perhaps a tapestry or something made by people where you live. You have to be very careful too about avoiding certain things. There are underlying messages in every gift in China. Numbers, for example, be very careful with numbers because 8 is a good number, a lucky number in China. 4 is the opposite. Never give anyone a clock or a watch because it looks as though you're setting a time limit on that relationship. Don't give anything sharp either. Scissors, knives, to be avoided, because they imply you want to cut off the relationship. And then last but not least, be careful how you package your gift. What color you use for wrapping paper. That's important too. Red is always a good bet. Red is a very lucky color in China, whereas black and white should be avoided because they remind people of funerals. And then, last but very not least, is when you give your gift, you must not be surprised or put off if it's not accepted. Apparently, it is absolutely polite, good manners in China, not to accept the gift the first time. You can try again, and it should be that the third time you offer your gift, it will be accepted very gracefully. I hope this is useful advice to you if you go to China. Thank you. I'm Helen Campbell from DG Interpretation, European Commission. I'm going to tell you a story about an interesting initiative being run in the county of Dorset, UK. Dorset is a rural area. It's on the coast, very pleasant county, and it is also the subject of an interesting new project. This is a project to try and reduce traffic accidents. The project is a sort of advertising campaign, but has an element of education in it, and of course there will be a lot of police patrolling involved. The whole thing is going to cost some £800,000. What is the aim? As I said, it's to reduce accidents, but especially those accidents that are caused by inattention by drivers. We see a lot of examples of inattention by drivers everywhere. In Belgium, certainly. In the UK, in France, you name it, there is always an example around us somewhere of someone not paying proper attention while driving. Now, it is said, and that's what they think in Dorset, certainly, that there is no such thing as a dangerous road. There is only bad and dangerous driving. So what's the programme going to do? It's going to try to focus on the sort of things that people do all the time that are not dangerous in themselves, but can cause accidents. The obvious infringements of the law are speeding, which is dangerous, talking on a handheld telephone, of course, a mobile phone, as we all do from time to time. These things are not even legal, but there are lots of other minor violations that I suspect we're all guilty of, which play a part in causing accidents. Changing your CD, fiddling with your radio, setting your GPS, for example, perhaps looking for a biscuit to eat in the car. All of these things will distract you from driving and mean that you're not in proper control of your vehicle. So say the police officers in charge of the team running this project. And they will be spending their time catching people who are in obviously infringement of the law. Now, will there be a price to pay? Of course there'll be a price to pay. It will probably be in the region of £60 if you're caught red-handed doing any of those things. And then you will have a choice. Either you will go to a driver's awareness course and learn how to drive more carefully, or you will have some points on your driving license. I believe 6 points is what will be given to you. Bear in mind that if you have 12 points on your license, that disqualifies you from driving for a period of 6 months. And so I suspect that the driver awareness courses are going to be very, very well subscribed to, certainly endorse it. Remember though, if you're driving there is no excuse going to work. You have to obey the rules, otherwise you pay the price. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Helen Campbell, formerly of DG Interpretation European Commission. I'm going to talk to you today about telephones, mobile phones, gadgets, and our attachment to them. Now, we are all very attached to our mobile phones, our smartphones, Blackberries, iPhones, iPads, gadgets in general for communication purposes. We see children nowadays, aged 5 and 6 years, and they all seem to have a mobile phone now. Now, I must say that I'm also attached to my phone, and I'm indeed sometimes, in meetings, for example, which may not always be very interesting, sometimes tempted to have a look at my messages, perhaps send a couple of messages. But I do try to do so discreetly. But not everybody is as discreet as me. I'm thinking of one particular person, a lady of some renown in the field of conference interpreting, who carries with her a number of mobile phones, which are on all the time. Now, this lady is quite likely to be talking to someone right the way through a meeting, or answering the phone and sending messages. In general, she takes not much notice of anything except the phones. I find this terribly impolite myself, but I realize that it's really quite common after all. It isn't just her, it's lots of people, even politicians. If you look at a debate in the House of Commons, you will see a lot of MPs fiddling with their phones, tweeting, sending messages. Not polite in my view, but it's a reality. And at the royal wedding earlier this year, we even saw the Prime Minister of the UK, David Cameron, sending messages during the ceremony. Not only David Cameron was doing that, so was Elton John. So we can see that people all over the place, regardless of the circumstances, do want to use their phones, do want to send messages. I personally find it, as I said, a little perhaps out of place sometimes, but it also makes me think that the plan to ban mobile phones for school children is not likely to be very successful. The idea is to stop children using their phones during classes by making them switch off the phones or leaving them outside the classroom. I suspect this will get nowhere fast. I think that not only will children feel uncomfortable without their phones beside them, but their parents will probably object as well. And so I think that's one plan that will certainly not come about. Thank you. I'm Helen Campbell, DG Interpretation, European Commission. I'm going to talk about football, but not specifically football, dietary advice given to those people who are following the current World Cup. And we're talking here of July 2010. Football lovers, of course, will have been gearing up to this mammoth festival of football for weeks and probably months. Much celebration, much excitement, and some people, of course, will be glued to the television all the time, watching the matches. I personally am not a football fan, and I'm trying very hard indeed to avoid all the football matches with some difficulty. However, since there is so much publicity attached to football, it has also been fun to read some of the articles surrounding the whole World Cup. For example, the Foods Standards Agency of the UK has issued a guide, some advice to help you whilst you're watching the match, whether it be in South Africa, or whether it be in your own home, or whether it be perhaps with friends watching a football match all together. It gives 4 pages of advice, and it cost rather a lot of money, £135,000, to put this volume together. Now, it tells you, for example, that you should avoid eating high-calorie foods, such as peanuts and crisps. You should also be careful of the amount that you eat during a football match, because as you will be very excited and perhaps jumping up and down, you should try to eat food that is not too indigestible. Pizza, it is recommended in this book, is not to be taken. Instead, you should opt for something like a vegetarian curry or perhaps a nice Greek salad. This will be lower in calories and much better for you. Now, football, as everybody knows, is, for better or for worse, also associated with a good deal of drinking of alcohol, I mean, and particularly beer. Now, our food agency warns us that drinking too much beer is bad for us, and that perhaps it would be advisable to drink mineral water with a slice of lemon instead. Now, the picture of a group of football fans going to a pub or going to a party, watching a match, watching their team win or indeed lose, and then celebrating or commiserating over a glass of water with lemon doesn't somehow sound to me very convincing. It would, of course, simply be a joke to issue guidelines on what to eat and drink during the World Cup, but it isn't. It's a perfectly serious brochure booklet that has now been issued. It gives a few more guidelines, such as to be careful not to drink too much if you go to a party, and to help your guests when they come to visit you for a football party by issuing them too with instructions on how best to get to your house and how best to go home. When you think that a lot of taxpayers' money has gone into this guide, it perhaps might make you a little angry. But after all, it is football time, and most people are only too happy, and I dare say they will not take a great deal of notice of the guidelines. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, I will be talking to you about languages in Luxembourg, the country where I live and work. Luxembourg is in an interesting situation where languages are concerned. Several languages are spoken and written throughout the whole country. So it is truly a multilingual country. First of all, there is the national language, called Letzeburgisch. French and German are also used everywhere in Luxembourg. This interesting situation with languages dates all the way back to the Middle Ages. In the 14th century, the territory of Luxembourg was divided into 2 large areas. In one of these areas, a dialect of French was spoken. In the other, a dialect of German was spoken, which then came to be Letzeburgisch. Already at that time, French was chosen as the language for the administration, and French continued to be the language of administration and legislation and politics right the way through the centuries. This might seem strange because the language that the people spoke at home and with each other was always Letzeburgisch, which is a dialect of German, not French. However, the nobility spoke French, and the French language therefore kept an important role. Both French and German have been compulsory languages in schools in Luxembourg since the 19th century. So what about Letzeburgisch? Well, Letzeburgisch was not an official language in Luxembourg until the 1980s. But now, by law, people living here are allowed to communicate with the administration in either Letzeburgisch or French or German. When they leave school, Luxembourgish children know 3 languages and sometimes more. And therefore, multilingualism comes naturally here. And of course, it is a huge advantage in the multilingual society that we live in today. Certainly, Luxembourgish children will have a head start if they want a career in languages. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Helen Campbell, formerly of DG Interpretation of the European Commission. And I'm going to talk to you today about pets and the effect of pets on your health. Now, I'm British, and as you probably know, most British people love animals. And most have pets as well. Usually it'll be a dog or a cat, but there's also now a fashion for pythons. Many people are buying pythons as pets. Well, whatever the pet might be, we all know that it's comforting when you come home, for example, your dog is waiting for you, and it's good for you to take the dog for a walk. People generally are happy to have these pets. But in fact, it goes a little further than that, because there have been some studies carried out recently that show that owning a pet actually has a very positive effect on your health. People who own pets tend to suffer less than others from headaches, migraines, back pain, or depression. They feel generally healthier, and they feel fitter for owning that pet. Of course, especially if it's a dog, because as I remember when I was younger, we had a wonderful dog whom I loved very much, but he had to be taken for 2 very long walks every day. Now, you take a dog for a long walk twice a day, maybe for half an hour, and you are probably going to be fairly fit. So by and large, owning a pet is going to be good for you. Some people will say, yes, but it's quite expensive, in fact. Yes, it is. It costs quite a lot to feed our very large dog, and that's true that is perhaps the downside. The other thing is, and this is certainly my own case, I travel an awful lot, and I live in a flat. And so it would be terribly unfair of me to buy a dog, because I would never be around enough, and I would have to rely on lots of friends to take the poor dog for a walk and to feed it. I can assure you, however, that one of these days when I do calm down and stop travelling so much, that will be one of my first thoughts. I think that I can see myself with a very pleasant Cocker Spaniel as a companion, and I shall take the Cocker Spaniel for long walks. Pets certainly are a good therapy and a great pleasure to have. Thank you. I'm Helen Campbell, DG Interpretation, European Commission. I'm going to tell you about a scheme which has been set up in the county of Dorset in the United Kingdom. And this scheme is designed to reduce the number of traffic accidents. Now, it is going to cost some £800,000 and it's going to run over a period of a year. It basically involves teaching drivers to pay more attention, since they believe in Dorset at least, that it is those small gestures of inattention that can cause accidents so easily. Things like fiddling with your GPS, or changing the disc, or fiddling with your radio button, or, if you're a smoker, lighting a cigarette. And still worse, using your mobile phone. All things which, unfortunately, happen more and more often. And Dorset is set now to try and reduce drastically the number of accidents. So the police are patrolling all the streets, especially those streets which have a higher than average number of accidents. If they catch you, they will fine you, give you points, penalty points in your driver's license, or the option of going to attend an driver's awareness course to learn to be better in control of your vehicle. Now, the police have caught quite a lot of people who were infringing the rules, and some of these people have shown amazing imagination. For example, one very imaginative gentleman, whilst explaining himself, came up with this story. He was just leaving his house, his own driveway, without buckling his safety belt. The police stopped him, and his excuse was he was just about to go and get petrol round the corner and had unbuckled his seatbelt. Another lady claimed that she'd left her BlackBerry at home, and that anybody who thought they'd seen her typing messages on her BlackBerry while driving was sorely mistaken. This was not such a good story because her BlackBerry was lying beside her on the passenger seat. And my favourite story of all concerns the lady with the 3 children in the back of her car. The police stopped her and noted that the children were not buckled in. So, of course, they asked, "Madam, why are these children not wearing seatbelts?" And the lady's answer was, "But they're not my children." That, I think, really is the best excuse of all. People become angry sometimes, indignant, but I think that everyone has understood, if they're driving in Dorset, that no excuse is going to work. The best thing you can do is to obey the rules or be ready to pay the price. Thank you.
Hello, my name's Kathy Pearson and I'm an interpreter in the English booth at the SCIC. Today I'm going to be talking to you about the 9/11 and the fact that it's 10 years since 9/11. So I'll be talking a little bit about that day and looking at the consequences of the attack over the last 10 years. I will now begin. Ladies and gentlemen, it's 10 years since 9/11, since the Twin Towers were attacked and the World Trade Center in New York collapsed. I think it's not an exaggeration to say that this is a day that changed the world. It's a day that nobody will forget. Everybody remembers what they were doing that day, what they were doing when they heard the news. There is now, of course, in the place of the Twin Towers, Ground Zero. This is a memorial site, and at the 10-year anniversary, there was a very big memorial service at Ground Zero. Millions of people came to commemorate the dead, to commemorate the almost 3,000 people who died and whose names are inscribed on the memorial at Ground Zero. Some of the dead were firefighters. It's thanks to the firefighters that as many people survived as they did. In fact, they managed to evacuate around 30,000 people. These firefighters were really the heroes of the day. But these heroes are now paying a high price. Many are suffering from cancer. They have an increased risk of getting skin cancer, prostate cancer, or thyroid cancer. But as well as the increased risk of cancer, they're also seeing problems with respiratory disorders. So they're finding it very hard to breathe. And besides physical illnesses, there are also mental illnesses which have, of course, appeared. Depression in some cases, panic attacks in others. So, in conclusion, it's good to remember the dead. It's good that we have these memorial services at Ground Zero every year to commemorate their passing. But let's not forget those who are still alive. Let's not forget the heroes of the day and their long-term suffering as a result of their heroism today. 9/11 is a day that changed the world and the lives of so many forever. It has had such far-reaching effects. Who knows what we'll see when we come to the 20th anniversary of 9/11. Thank you.
I'm Helen Campbell from DG Interpretation, European Commission, and I'm going to tell you about my favourite drink. This is champagne. Everybody who knows me knows that I like champagne. It can be a birthday celebration, a Christmas celebration, perhaps a wedding, or just any old day. Champagne is always the right thing to drink. And so I was very happy to receive from a friend of mine an article just before Christmas about the beneficial effects of drinking champagne. Just before Christmas, of course, it was perfectly timed. It seems that scientists have found during their research the fact that a few glasses of champagne every day is good for you. Good for your heart, good for your blood circulation. And it doesn't have to be champagne, it can even be other varieties of sparkling wine, such as cava, prosecco, or sekt. The effects are the same. What good news, I said to myself. And who carried out this research? It was a team in the United Kingdom, the University of Reading, and another team in France, joint research. The results were published in the British Journal of Nutrition, where we learned that those 2 to 3 glasses a day would have a very beneficial effect on the blood vessels, would help reduce heart disease, and altogether was a good thing. Now, we knew about red wine. Red wine, everybody knows, has very beneficial effects in small doses, of course, because it contains polyphenols. Polyphenols also are contained in champagne because it is a variety of black grape, or a few varieties of black grape, that are used to produce champagne. Therefore, the effects are beneficial, and if you keep to moderate drinking, you are likely to be doing your heart a great deal of good. May I therefore recommend that any time is the right time for champagne, and that we should all raise our glasses to the production and consumption of this most excellent, wonderful drink, my favourite tipple. Thank you.
My topic today is divorce vouchers. January is the most popular month for filing for divorce in the United Kingdom. This is apparently because spending 2 weeks together over the Christmas break is often the last straw for unhappy couples. One of Britain's biggest divorce law firms gets a 60% increase in inquiries in the first week of January every year. But some lucky couples will have had a head start. They're the ones who received divorce vouchers for Christmas. The divorce vouchers are being sold by a British law firm that specializes in family law. The company is emphasizing that the divorce vouchers aren't quite as bad as they sound. They claim that the divorce vouchers should be seen more as vouchers for receiving legal advice. The aim of the vouchers isn't to force people to get a divorce. Instead, they are designed to give people a chance to discuss the legal consequences of separating from their husband or wife. Whichever way you view them, the divorce vouchers are in demand. They are being bought as birthday or Christmas presents, or simply to send a clear message to a relative or friend. Most of the vouchers are bought by women for female friends. Groups of women often all chip in some money to buy a voucher. They do this because they want to send a clear message to a friend that their relationship is completely dysfunctional and that it's time they ended it. Some of the vouchers are bought by the agents or managers of celebrities who are fed up with hearing about their clients' marital problems. And a few vouchers have been bought by the mistresses of married men to send a very unsubtle signal that it was time they left their wife. But the company is fairly sure that no one has bought a voucher as a joke. That's because of the cost. The company offers 2 vouchers. A half hour of legal advice will cost £125 and a full hour will cost £250. Either way, these vouchers would be a very expensive laugh. So, if you're looking for the perfect gift for an unhappily married friend, a divorce voucher might be just the thing. Thank you.
I'm Helen Campbell, DG Interpretation of the European Commission, and I'm going to talk about Facebook and some aspects of its rise in fame and fortune. Well, it isn't Facebook so much that has risen in fame and fortune as the CEO, the young gentleman who founded it all 6 years ago, Mark Zuckerberg. He set up this site in order to allow for exchanges among his friends and Ivy League associates, and it has become absolutely enormous. It's become the website for social interaction. People don't talk anymore, they write to each other on Facebook. They send their updates on profiles, what they're going to do on holiday, they exchange photographs, and even to things like marital arguments and gossip sessions, Facebook is the way in which they communicate. And apparently that form of communication is now what everybody wants. Perhaps not everybody. It is mainly the category of below 30 years in age. 75% of the subscribers to Facebook are younger than 30. And as I said, this is an enormously popular website, so much so that they now number 500,000 subscribers. It does mark a huge cultural shift, there's no doubt. It's a different way to relate to your friends, and indeed a wider circle of friends. It also means that people are much more open, perhaps less reserved. I read recently about a couple who were exchanging very lengthy comments and turning into a big argument, whereupon other friends had to intervene between these two to put the argument to an end, finally bring it to a happy close. It seems to me strange that people would argue in public, but that's what's happening. You can, of course, broadcast to everybody your likes and your dislikes, what books you may have enjoyed reading, what films you saw recently. And that, you might think, would be that. But it isn't just your closed circle of friends that will be reading about your likes and dislikes, because that's not the way Facebook works. If you want a degree of privacy, so I read, it's quite hard to come by, because the default settings on Facebook allow this information to be circulated quite far and wide. And so you might say that you liked a particular book, and then, lo and behold, the next day you will find Amazon.com sending you lists of other books by the same author. In other words, you don't have any privacy. The information has already gone much further than your group of friends. This is what I personally find very worrying indeed. I don't know if things will change. I know that Mark Zuckerberg had to apologize because of this privacy issue. but apparently very few people are bothered by it. So perhaps that is just the way of the future. People won't speak anymore. They'll just talk through Facebook. Thank you.
Hello. Today I'm going to talk about something which is quite germane to the training or to the training course that maybe you're enrolled in to become an interpreter. It is about overcoming the fear of public speaking. Up until 2 years ago, the most frightening thing I could possibly think of, and I mean more frightening than finding a spider in your slippers in the morning, was to make a speech in front of a benign audience. The fear that I had of making a speech in public was as extreme as it was irrational, and therefore I would go to extraordinary lengths to avoid speaking in public. That was until my 40th birthday. At that juncture, I realized that this phobia was not only career limiting, it was also pathetic. Therefore, I began to accept public speaking invitations. The night before my first ever presentation, I got exactly no sleep at all. In order to overcome my rather bedraggled look, I decided to wear bright orange stockings in the hope that I could trick the audience into thinking that the speaker was going to be as jaunty as the colour of her tights. Anyway, given my history and my sympathy for the millions of other people like me who share this phobia, I get very cross when I see dud advice being given. I saw some such advice in a very well business review not long ago. There, the review very confidently stated, before your first public speaking engagement, the most important thing is to get a good night's sleep. Clearly, the author in question had absolutely no clue what they were writing about. The whole point of nerves is that you get no sleep. Therefore, I would like to take this opportunity to share with you 5 pieces of advice that I have found useful since deciding to accept public speaking engagements. First of all, it is probably best to avoid taking sleeping pills. Sleeping pills not only get rid of all the nerves and help you to sleep, they also get rid of any feeling and most of your intelligence as well, or certainly sensitivity. It's better to be shattered than be a zombie when turning up to speak. The second piece of advice is to offset an irrational fear with a larger rational danger. For example, on my way to one speaking engagement, I almost got run over by a bus. My relatively cool reaction to this life-threatening moment shamed me into feeling ridiculous about how anxious I could get about an irrational fear of simply standing up in front of an ordinary audience to speak. My third piece of advice is remember how awful most other speakers are. In some, the bar is low. You can easily clear it. 4, and it's probably the most obvious piece of advice, is arrive unfeasibly early. And that is to remove all risk of being late and reduce it to 0. There's no point in adding to the nervousness of talking in public with the nervousness about being late. The nervousness of being late. And 5, practice in front of an unforgiving audience. And for that, I would recommend selecting a teenager. A young teen who never laughs at your jokes and intermittently moans, "Is it over yet?" After all, a bad rehearsal makes for a good performance. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Peter Hughes, I'm British, and today I'm going to talk to you about the tube etiquette in London, and I will start my speech now. I can imagine many of you have visited London, possibly in the last couple of years, to visit all the tourist sites that London holds, such as Buckingham Palace, Big Ben, London Bridge. There's all sorts of things to see and do in London. However, the question is, how do you get to these places? London is also known as being a very expensive city, so taxis are probably out of the question. And cycling, well, cycling is not really seen as a safe way of getting around the city. So many people take the tube, that is, the underground or the metro. Now, British people are known for their quirky politeness and their social interactions, and this can definitely be seen on the tube, as the ways of navigating the system is very, very important. So what you need to do is remember these following steps. Is once you arrive at the tube station, have your ticket ready to get through the barriers, because people will be rushing past you. So you need to remember to have your ticket ready and not hold up the queue behind you. And then once you get through the barrier, you need to make sure you're going in the right direction by looking at which arrows direct you to which line, whether you want to get on the red central line or the dark blue line for Piccadilly or the light blue line for Victoria. You need to know on what colour you're going on and in which direction. Then you will get to the escalator. This is very important, and you'll hear the announcements say they need to stand on the right and walk on the left. Do not get this mixed up, because you will not become very popular. Then once you arrive at the platform, you need to make sure that you walk down the platform, because many people tend to just cluster around the entrance, which causes a lot of, stress for lots of people. So if you walk down the platform, you're more likely to find it easier to get on the tube once it arrives. Once the train arrives into the tube station, remember to stand back and let others off before you get onto the train. This is very important, as again, this can cause a lot of frustration and a lot of tension between people. Then, once you're on the tube, you may sit down if you can find a seat, or if you don't, make sure you walk down the carriage rather than stand by the doorway. If you happen to sit in priority seat, that is, the seat next to the door, make sure you give your seat up to anybody who looks like they need it, that is, a pregnant woman, somebody who's disabled, or the elderly. Again, this is very much a social rule and regulation that is implemented whilst travelling on the tube. And then hopefully you'll arrive at your destination without any fuss, and you can enjoy the rest of your trip. Thank you.
I'm Helen Campbell from DG Interpretation, European Commission, and I'm going to talk about Germany and working mothers there. Now, it is a perhaps strange phenomenon that in Germany, unlike most countries, children go to school only in the mornings. When I went to stay with a German family, age 16, that is one of the things I found most strange. I thought, what a pity that there aren't any possibilities for lessons in the afternoon. Not that I was that keen on lessons, but it was shortly before exams, and so one needed all the school time one could possibly get. But not in Germany. In fact, I also remember that children started school later than I had. I went to school aged 4.5, my German counterpart aged 6. But the rules are different, and yet our realities are very similar. Parents are working. Most adults need jobs, and most jobs are full-time. So given our lifestyles, it seems strange that children are going to be free in the afternoons, and it's expected that one of their parents, usually the mother, is going to be at home, therefore. It seems out of sync with reality now. Of course, it doesn't do the children any great harm. They can study in the afternoons too, but they will need, in many cases, supervision, at least when they're young. Starting ages from 6 and up to about 12, you will expect that children will need to be supervised somewhere. I remember at school that it was in the afternoons that we did sport and study periods, so we weren't overly stressed by the afternoon schooling. Now, thinking back 30, 40 years, things were different. Most fathers worked, most mothers stayed at home and didn't have jobs. I remember in my own school, only one of my friends at school had a working mother. In Germany, things are, just as they are everywhere else, quite different now. And one poor lady in Bavaria found herself totally ostracized recently by her neighbors for the simple reason that she, a working mother, decided to send her 9-year-old child to the local primary school full-time, because that local primary school had introduced afternoon schooling as well. The neighbours were horrified. The reactions went from anger to irritation. People criticised her and said, if you don't want to have children, that's one thing. But if you do, then you should be there to take care of them all the time, and you shouldn't be working. I find that really very peculiar and very outdated. But I believe that in Germany things are moving now towards more and more primary schools offering schooling in the afternoons. One hopes that people will begin now to get used to this idea. Thank you. I'm Helen Campbell, DG Interpretation of the European Commission. I'm going to talk to you now about soap operas on television and how they might help in educating people. Yes, that is exactly what I'm going to talk about. Now, many people, including many friends of mine, are totally addicted to soap operas. I'm thinking immediately of some of the British series that I know perhaps best, things like Coronation Street and EastEnders. And when I say I know them, please do not think for one moment that I'm addicted to soap operas. I just know of their existence. And so far, I have not fallen under the spell. But I know people who will adapt their schedules in order not to miss an episode. Soap operas appeal to many people, across a very wide spectrum as well, from the intellectually sophisticated to those of little or no formal education at all. And behind the scenes, television companies and governments and NGOs have all realized that perhaps television and soap operas in particular can be used to get some serious messages across. That might be the best way. Messages such as health issues, HIV, AIDS, nutrition, domestic violence, the status of women in developing countries, and other fairly serious subjects. If a viewer can identify with the protagonist, with the actor in a series, that viewer can almost share the dreams and hopes of such a character and identify with the character. Thus, a proper connection is there, and the message will get through much more easily than some lesson or finger pointing. That never works. Now, in the United States, in Colorado, there is a soap opera that has been shown on health questions. In fact, that is the actual subject too. The aim is to increase the number of children who are covered by health insurance. This is a problem because many children are eligible, but they don't have any coverage for one reason or another. And so the program is shown to wake people up to the fact that it is time to take out health insurance. But it's couched in terms of entertainment so that people will watch, be interested, and nevertheless pick up a very important message indeed. There are other examples too. I'll name one more in Africa, where UNICEF has been working in Niger, and they have gone together with the local state TV to put on a drama for young people. The drama happens in the capital, Niamey, and the plots include issues concerning the danger of HIV/AIDS, prevention methods. So it's a lesson, but in a very palatable form. And this works much better than any school lessons ever do. Thank you. I'm Helen Campbell from DG Interpretation, European Commission, and I'm going to talk about Germany and working mothers. I recall many, many years ago that I did an exchange with my German pen friend, and she lived in Hamburg. Now, this is going back to the 1960s. And I went with her to school as well. We were sixth form, as it was then for me, so aged 15, 16. And I found it strange that we only went to school in the mornings. After all, this was shortly before sitting A-levels, or Abitur, as it is in Germany. But nevertheless, no, the afternoons were free. I thought it was a a bit of a waste of time in many ways, but nobody seemed to question the rule. School was for the morning, homework or other activities for the afternoon at home. Now, of course, my pen friend's mother didn't work, so she was at home to welcome us and to take us around, in my case, showing me Hamburg as well. I found it strange, nevertheless. And equally, I found strange the rule that the shops at weekends shut at lunchtime on Saturday. And there was no Sunday opening, of course. The only deviation from that rule was every first Saturday in the month, the shops could stay open until 6 o'clock. But it was very regulated. No exceptions were made except for the 4 weeks preceding Christmas, when later shopping hours were allowed. And things haven't changed very much. The shops do open now until Saturday afternoon, but there's still no Sunday opening. And this compares very strikingly with many other places. I'm thinking especially of my own city, London, where you can go shopping any time you like, where everything seems to be awake and absolutely open round the clock. This is, of course, very convenient for consumers. Most people work. A lot of people need every single day for their jobs, and the only time they get to go shopping is Sunday. But in Germany, the trade unions protect workers very carefully indeed. People are not willing to change. They're not keen to change. And this makes life quite difficult for some people, especially working mothers. Women now work as much as men. Basically, everybody has a job. So it's very difficult for women. If they have a job, what are they to do with their children? The crèche and kindergartens that exist in many places are not so widespread in Germany. And so one starts to wonder, isn't Germany out of step? Shouldn't they start thinking about new regulations? And shouldn't, after all, school be provided in the afternoons as well? One would have thought so, and indeed, slowly but surely, even Germany is starting to change and to take account of realities. How? Well, this, of course, will mean, again, a lot of rethinking, changing, but it's going to happen sooner rather than later. Thank you.
This is also a speech about eggs. Dear colleagues, when I finally hit upon eggs as a topic fit for memory exercises, I certainly didn't realize that I was onto such a good thing. I could spend hours talking about their beautiful oval shapes, all the sizes and colors that they come in, the different textures of the shell, how the shells can look smooth but actually be quite rough, the fact that some eggs are ridged and some are not. And that's just sticking to chickens' eggs. I don't think I'd better even go into all the other egg-laying species on this earth. I've already spoken about a couple of ways to cook eggs. And of course, they're an ingredient in an incredible number of preparations. Everything from pastry to pasta, but I thought that I'd better change tack this time. This time, I thought I could be a little bit more scientific. Not so much looking at the science of eggs, which would be what they're made up of, what's in the yellow egg yolk, what's in the egg white, and all of that. But perhaps look at how eggs themselves are used in science as an ingredient. Eggs are wonderful. They're a safe, sterile place where chicks grow outside the mother hen's body. They've provided scientists with an incredible opportunity to study the growth and development of chicks, from the blob of egg yolk all the way to the hatching of a fluffy yellow chick. And, quite amazingly, all that's needed for this development is a constant temperature. Eggs are natural incubators. This is what scientists in the USA discovered in the 1930s. Fertile chicken eggs are the perfect breeding medium for certain viruses that can affect human beings. The most familiar examples would be influenza and chickenpox. Eggs were therefore used by scientists who are studying these diseases in order to produce more virus to use in their studies. These studies, in turn, led to the development of vaccines against these diseases. What vaccination actually is injecting a healthy person with either a very small dose of a weak live virus or else of a dead virus, so that the body can build up antibodies in order to fight the disease. What this means is that eggs are actually produced in industrial quantities, not just for people to eat, but also for the pharmaceutical industry, for use in research and virus cultivation. So the next time you see a barn where eggs are being produced in vast quantities, you might just wonder whether the eggs are for human consumption or for scientific use.
Ladies and gentlemen, pirates in the seas off the East African coast were very much in the news some years ago. I'm going to tell you about one incident that answers a rather interesting question. Can pirates actually become friends? Friends of a ship owner whose vessel they have stolen? The story begins with a ship and its crew hijacked off the Somali coast. The Danish ship owner, and I shall call this gentleman Mr. G, receives a phone call one day. From the other end of the receiver, he hears, "Hi, my name is Ali. I am the leader of the Somali pirates that have seized your vessel." In fact, Mr. G said, they would ring him up on the phone just like a business negotiation. Very reasonable, polite, and courteous. No threats. Most respectable. Mr. G felt it was like working with a car salesman. They were haggling over the ransom amount for months. Ali, working for the pirates, would throw out a big number. Mr. G would say, "Give me a break. That's a joke." And he would put the phone down. Ali would call back with a slightly lower offer. Eventually, they came to an agreement. The money was dropped from a helicopter, and Mr. G finally got his vessel and his crew back. That should have been the end of the story, right? But no, the story continues. One day, the phone rings. Mr. G is in Copenhagen in his kitchen, and he picks up the phone. It is Mr. Ali calling him from Somaliland. Almost like a courtesy call, says Mr. G. Ali wanted to say he had gotten back home after walking many, many kilometers overland through the mountains. A hijacking is like a commercial transaction. Once it's over, it's like you've concluded a business deal. It's not a win-win situation, but as these things go, Ali and his pirates got the better of the ship owner, but Mr. G got his ship back and the crew in reasonable mental condition. And that was the purpose of the whole exercise. In fact, Ali followed up with phone calls and then emails. On a daily basis, Mr. G and Ali would talk about piracy issues, sometimes 4 to 5 times a week over the phone. Ali now says, they are friends. He also says, Mr. G has a nice family. Mr. G says, Ali has a wife and recently a new addition to the family, a baby boy. When he was born, Mr. G got an excited call and he was informed that he had been allocated 3 baby camels, a traditional gift for a friend of any good family in Somalia. Mr. G says, I feel very honored.
Hello. In this speech, I'm going to tell you a few things about interpreting at the place where I work, the United Nations office in Geneva. And I shall begin. Ladies and gentlemen, as you probably know, the United Nations has 6 official languages: English, French, Spanish, Arabic, Russian, and Chinese. In order to service a meeting with all 6 languages, 14 interpreters are required. There are 2 in each of the English, French, Spanish, and Russian booths, and 3 interpreters in the Arabic and Chinese booths. The reason why they have an extra team member there is because the Chinese and Arabic booths work both into that language and out of that language, providing a retour into either English or French, with the other booths then taking that retour on relay. In fact, relay is very much a prominent feature of the interpreting system that has been set up here at the United Nations. For example, when Spanish or Russian are spoken, they are interpreted directly into English and French, with all the other booths then taking those ones on relay. So we don't have interpreters in the Spanish booth who work directly from Russian. They will always work on relay. And the same can be said of Spanish into Chinese. It's always done via a relay. Not all the languages, not all the meetings which are serviced here are 6 language meetings. This is because a few years ago, the United Nations General Assembly adopted a resolution restricting the working languages of some committees to just 3. So we have, for example, a number of committees which we call the Human Rights Treaty Bodies, which work in 3 languages, normally English, French, and Spanish, although they are free to choose their languages out of any of the 6 official languages in line with the real needs of the members sitting on those committees at any given time. An additional language can also be added to a meeting if required. For example, if a delegation is coming from an Arabic-speaking country, then an Arabic booth can be added for that meeting, so that there would then be 4 languages available. Overall, our service comprises around 100 interpreters, with 20 in the English and French booths and some 15 in the other 4 booths. For several months a year, the staff interpreters are enough to service all the meetings going on here in Geneva. But there are peaks, normally in the spring and in the autumn, when freelance interpreters have to be recruited in order to cover the needs. This is because there is an uneven split or uneven scheduling of meetings throughout the year. And this is one of the issues which has to be addressed so that we can make the best possible use of the resources that we have. In the meantime, please allow me to suggest that you take a look at UN Web TV, available on the internet, so you can see the kind of meetings which go on here at the United Nations office in Geneva, and see the challenges that they pose for interpreters. Thank you very much.
Hello. My name is Helen Campbell. I'm going to talk to you today about climate change and some strange phenomena. And I'm going to start now. We hear an awful lot about global warming and climate change, great dangers, and we see sad photographs of polar bears floating on chunks of ice. But when we're in the middle of winter, it does seem hard to believe that there is something like warming going on at all. Still, if we look at North America and the recent winters there, they have been very, very harsh. The winter of 2013 to 14 was a good example. The eastern half of North America was plunged in ice for months on end. In fact, 90% of the Great Lakes froze over there. The average temperature in North America was 1 degree below the 20th century average. And yet, in Europe, we had rather mild winters. Virtually no snow at all and no freezing temperatures. But that actually is bad. You need to have some freezing days as well. Otherwise, all the microbes and viruses will, of course, breed and multiply. And in summer, we had all sorts of plagues, infestations of insects, flies, and even ladybirds, and aphids, all destroying our plants. Now, it's true to say that harsh winters and snow and ice cause all sorts of disruption. Dreadful nuisance, hard to travel, you can't drive. You have to turn up your heating, and that's expensive. And so we should remember that when it's cold, there is a very good reason for it. Question now, is there really a warming of our planet? Well, now everything I read tells me that the answer is actually yes, there is. And why? Because of a new phenomenon. This is called Arctic amplification. Arctic amplification means the far north is warming up faster than the rest of the globe. The white snow cover reflecting sunlight is replaced by dark ocean, and that absorbs heat. So the trend will be towards warming, even though we can expect some cold winters to come. After that, the experts may well turn out to be quite correct. We have global warming. Thank you.
Hello. This year I will be celebrating a very special anniversary. In fact, 20 years ago, on the 7th of October 1992 to be precise, I finally managed to stop smoking. Now I say finally because I had tried several times previously to quit smoking, but I was always unable to do so. I had started smoking cigarettes as a young boy, thinking I was very cool. I was just a young teenager at the time. And very quickly, I became addicted to the habit. Over the years, of course, I became increasingly aware of the dangers of smoking, the dangers to my health. But as I say, I found it very hard to give up the habit, basically because tobacco and all the products that it contains is extremely addictive. And as I say, I had become an addict. In the end, it was only when my wife and I decided that we were going to try and have children, start a family, that I was finally able to make the breakthrough and quit the habit. I didn't want my children growing up in a smoke-filled atmosphere because, of course, by then I had learnt something about the dangers of passive smoking in particular. So, as I say, finally on the 7th of October 1992, a historic date for me, I smoked my last cigarette, or at least what I hope will be my last cigarette. Now, because I know how addictive smoking is and how difficult it is to stop smoking once you've started, I was particularly, how can I put it, let's say disturbed recently by an article that I read in the newspaper, which basically described what the big tobacco companies are up to. What they're up to in order to get young people in particular hooked on cigarettes. They are actually increasing the amount of addictive substances in cigarettes in order to get young people hooked and keep them hooked. And this seems to me to be totally unacceptable at a time when governments around the world are trying to wean people off this terrible habit. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Anna Stewart, and I'm a trainee at DG Interpretation. This speech will be about taking a gap year. The speech will start shortly. Gap years are now quite common for students in the UK, after they finish college and before starting university. There are many advantages to taking a gap year, but there are also some disadvantages. Students who take a gap year will either go travelling or work for a year. Some will even do both. Not all gap years are the same, which makes them so interesting. It's a time when many young people get their first proper work or travelling experience. One of the benefits of working for a year is that students can save a lot of money before starting university. Although many students will get a loan for university, it is not normally enough to cover all the costs of accommodation, food, or university fees. Also, if you work for a year, you can gain important skills and experience. Work teaches discipline, and many students have not had any work experience by the time they finish school. Although some people, like myself, had a job at weekends in a shop. Many people will choose to go travelling, sometimes for many months. This is an excellent way to see more of the world and gain life experience. If you travel, you will meet different people and see different things. For example, I went to China, Australia, and New Zealand, where I met people of all nationalities and visited lots of different cultural sites. A gap year is a good opportunity to challenge yourself and learn many different skills which will be useful at university. It gives you a year to mature and is a good way to get real-world experience after being in full-time education. This means when it's time to start at university, you are ready to learn. However, a gap year is not for everyone, and there are some possible disadvantages. If you travel abroad, especially to some more popular gap year destinations like Thailand, Australia, or South America, it can be very expensive, which means when you get to university, you may have less financial security. Another problem can be if you are the only one of your friends who takes a gap year, then you will be 1 year behind them. You won't share experiences, you may graduate later, and you may feel left behind. It's hard to motivate yourself when your friends are already free from university. Also, if you take a year out, you can lose some of the study skills that you learnt at school. It can be very difficult to remember how to learn and study. This can be very difficult, especially if you're going to study a subject like maths or chemistry and you've forgotten useful theories or equations. In conclusion, the most important thing to remember is that it's neither a good or a bad decision to take a gap year. It's up to the individual and what's right for them. When I did my gap year, I did it so I could work, travel, and learn a new language.
I'm Helen Campbell, DG Interpretation, European Commission. I'm going to talk about Facebook. I'm sure that you are all very familiar with Facebook, a lot more familiar than I am, no doubt. But I've read an awful lot about it, as I suppose have most people. Facebook is a big success, a huge website success, and it now numbers 500,000 people amongst its subscribers. 500,000 is an awful lot of people, and therefore it is something of an enormous success. In fact, if it were a country, it would be the third largest country by population numbers. But it's not. As I said, it's a highly successful website. Now, all this has happened, this huge overriding success, in the space of only 6 years. Facebook was set up by a young undergraduate in his early 20s, one Mark Zuckerberg. He is now, of course, the CEO of Facebook. He simply began the plan in his dormitory room, and he thought it would be a good way to set up a website to keep the Ivy League students in touch with each other, keeping tabs on each other, exchanging some information and news. And it's gone from that, as I said, in 6 years only, to a real web superpower. A superpower that can number that many people has an awful lot of influence too. Well, it's all part of the development of so many different aspects of the web. Thinking back, we began with Microsoft that made computers easy for all. Then we had Google to help us search, and then YouTube to entertain us. But Facebook? Well, Facebook has a huge advantage over perhaps all the others because of the emotional investment of its users. The people who subscribe are laughing together, exchanging their opinions, exchanging holiday photographs, generally talking to each other, but talking to each other through Facebook as opposed to directly. It means, too, that this is really a question of living your private life in a public arena. Now, whether or not that is a good or a bad thing, that is for you to judge. But it certainly shows an enormous change now compared with, say, 10 or 20 years ago. Because we didn't live our private lives in the public arena then, as people are doing now. Thank you.